I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I say this, but the state of media in this country is in pretty bad shape. I mean, you've got liberal pundits like Bill Maher, Mika Brzezinski, Joe Scarborough, Cenk Uygur, and Anna Kasparian all capitulating to fascists, basically, while conservative pundits predictably are doing pro-state propaganda that's so sycophantic it makes North Korean state TV look combative by comparison. For example, while the stock market was crashing and burning because of Donald Trump's tariffs, Fox News was trying to distract their brain-dead audience with anti-trans hysteria so that way they wouldn't think about their 401ks that they were losing. And so-called independent media is somehow even worse, because rather than avoiding the subject like good propagandists, some of them are opting for the bold strategy of trying to convince their viewers that economic destruction is actually good. For example, far-right influencer The Quivering tweeted out, "You do not need the new iPad. You do not need the new cell phone. You do not need the new video game console. You want them." There is a big difference, and if you look at the people whining about the tariffs, I challenge you to ask them how their lives have been affected in any way. And this is really rich coming from the guy who proudly displays his Funko Pops and extensive Magic the Gathering collection behind him. In other words, it's okay for him to spend money on frivolous bullshit because he probably makes hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year bitching about movies and video games being too woke on YouTube. But if you're one of the peasants who has a real job and you work a 9 to 5, well, you don't have the right to complain. And you have to shut the fuck up and tighten your belt because this multimillionaire said so. The audacity of him of all people to make this argument. And to be clear, he would not be saying this if a Democratic president was crashing the economy, but since the goal is to disseminate conservative pro-Trump propaganda all the time to his reactionary audience, he knows that he's expected to toe the line no matter what to keep the gravy train rolling. And so many of these right-wing media personalities are nothing more than NPCs with no core principles or beliefs of their own. They simply say what they think their audience wants to hear to get views and clicks. For example, look at how drastically closeted homosexual conservative commentator Benny Johnson's take on the stock market changed since last year.
Losing money costs you nothing. This is just the reality of life. You're gonna, like, were you young and dumb? How much money did you lose? Everyone loses money. Everyone loses money. It costs you nothing. In fact, it builds quite a bit of character. In fact, you learn a lot of lessons actually by losing money. It's bloody Black Monday. Holy moly. The Kamala crash is here. Kamala needs to get in front of a camera today. People are losing their homes today. People are losing their fortunes today. People are losing their futures today. People are losing their 401ks today. This is shaping up to be one of the worst market days in American history.
Shameless. Absolutely shameless. See, these people don't give a shit about you. They'll only invoke working class issues to attack Democrats, but they don't actually care about working class issues because all of these propagandists are not working class people. They're multimillionaires doing propaganda for multi-billionaires. So your pain and suffering has no impact on their daily lives, and they're only going to use it if there's something to be gained politically by talking about the issues that you experience. But in focusing on so-called independent right-wing pundits, I don't want to give you the impression that liberal media is somehow good, because while they're certainly not as bad as the conservative bootlickers in the independent space, independent liberal figures are also pretty partisan, unfortunately. These big-time liberal YouTubers who actually do score interviews with Democratic Party politicians almost never ask confrontational questions and instead just get the politician they're interviewing to explain how bad Republicans are to the liberal audiences, which, I mean, if you have the opportunity to speak truth to power and ask Democrats about how they're failing their own constituents, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, the partisanship is just embarrassing. So in my view, independent media is a bit of a misnomer because there's really not that many truly independent people. They exist for sure, but people like me, Secular Talk, Rational National, the others, we're the minority. And as the number of good independent journalists and commentators dwindle, the bad ones are somehow getting even worse. Now, we already know that some of the biggest names in conservative media, like Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, and Tim Pool, became unwitting mouthpieces for Russia through a deal that they struck with Tenant Media, which demonstrates that these people are nothing more than whores who apparently didn't think to question whether or not there was anything suspicious about a multi-million-dollar deal from an investor that they've never heard of named Edward Gregorian. Sounds legit. I mean, when money talks, they listen. That's what motivates these people. They don't have some broader goal for the country, no core beliefs or ideology. It's just about the cash. But in all fairness, in that situation, they were victims. Sure, they did get millions of dollars out of it that they didn't have to return, but nonetheless, they were victims who were unwittingly duped into producing propaganda for a foreign government. But they somehow reached a new low because some of those same bootlickers are now willingly doing propaganda at the behest of a different foreign government. As Jewish Insider reports, Israel's war criminal Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was currently wanted by the International Criminal Court, held a private meeting with several podcasters, including Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, and Bethany Mandel, who wrote a book on wokeness but couldn't define it. And Tim Pool confirmed that the meeting took place on Twitter and called the discussion between him and Netanyahu, quote, interesting. Oh, was it? Interesting. That's the word that you're using? Alrighty then. Now, if you had the chance to meet with the modern-day equivalent of Adolf Hitler, who's currently doing a Holocaust, one would think that that would be at the top of your mind when you're formulating your question, but apparently not. None of these influencers reportedly asked Netanyahu about the genocide that he's currently doing. The genocide that he is wanted for by the International Criminal Court for doing, which is a hint as to why they were invited there in the first place. But according to Tim Pool, none of the other people asked meaningful questions, and really he was the only one to ask a substantive question, according to him. Now, if you read the write-up in Jewish Insider, the question that he asked was utterly useless, but according to him, they wildly misrepresented the question that he asked, and he was upset about that because people were thinking that he was a bit of a bootlicker for not challenging a war criminal. So he's going to set the record straight and explain why the question that he asked was actually better than they made it out to be. Let's listen.
I think I was the only one that asked a real question. Now that I've pissed off all the other journalists and individuals who were there, most people were asking what I would describe as, I don't know, I felt like pretty obvious questions. Is there going to be a war with Iran? Do you think the nuclear talks are going to be good? The Trump is going to be talking with you? Will it work out for you? What's the concern? What's going on with your prime ministership or whatever? And you get these answers that I really felt like you could have just got off Fox News. The prime minister is going to get asked about this stuff and he's going to say, I can't speak too much on the nuclear deals, blah, blah, blah. Considering this was Chatham House and it was expected whatever he said was going to come out, I didn't see anything really substantive. However, in the story, they say, Pool expressed concerns about increased anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the pro-Trump podcasting space, according to sources in the room. So they weren't there. Pool famously had Kanye West on his podcast, and the rapper walked out mid-interview after Pool pushed back against anti-Semitic comments. Responding to Pool, Netanyahu said that the reason he invited the group is to meet with him. To me? Pool argued that there is a Qatari op to manipulate social media algorithms to make anti-Semitic and anti-Israel episodes appear to receive far more views than, say, tips for picking up women, in order to incentivize podcasters and YouTubers to produce more anti-Semitic content. Netanyahu, however, was non-committal in his response, saying that's only possible. Fake news!
How dare you, Tim?
Absolute fake news. It's close to reality, but this is what they do, okay? First, the person who was there clearly wasn't there. Ask somebody who then conveyed incorrectly what I actually said. I said, there has been a report released from pro-Israel sources alleging Qatar is funding bots and operations to promote anti-Israel content. Is there any evidence that's true? And he said, I don't know. It's possible. That's what happened. I did not say they actually were doing that because I don't know that they're actually doing it. However, I did, to a variety of people, express what I've expressed on this show, that there are clearly bots that are anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. That is not to say that people who are critical of Israel don't exist or that no one is critical of Israel. People certainly are.
In other words, they basically portrayed his question correctly. It was as pathetic as the article made it out to be. You were talking, Tim, to a mass murdering war criminal wanted by the International Criminal Court, and you asked him about online bots criticizing him. Tim, you are a fucking joke. Bootlicker isn't a sufficient descriptor for tools like you. It's bad enough to throw a softball question to anyone in power, because if you have access to power, you should use that opportunity to challenge power and speak truth to power. But you had the opportunity to confront a wanted war criminal who will go down as one of the most ruthless killers in human history, and you asked him about online bots, Tim. Israel has bombed hospitals and refugee camps. IDF soldiers have been on video laughing about sniping children in the heads. But bots, that was what was at the top of your mind. I can't even fucking wrap my head around it. You are a spineless coward, Tim. And if I were you, I would never be able to look myself in the mirror again after that shit show. But he goes on to make the case as to why his question actually was super tough in actuality, and we all just don't get it. And it's because, since there's possibly so much anti-Israel bots, anti-Israel sentiment is growing, particularly in the podcast space. So he was letting Netanyahu know that support for Israel will inevitably decline. And apparently him telling Netanyahu that they're losing support is his idea of confronting Netanyahu, because he told him about Israel's waning popularity. Didn't mention why their popularity was waning, which was the elephant in the room that none of them addressed. But that's apparently supposed to be a tough question, a substantive question, according to Tim Pool. First of all, Netanyahu knows about his international reputation and the reputation of Israel, and he doesn't care. Second of all, if you're not going to communicate why Israel is losing support, i.e. ethnic cleansing, genocide, war crimes, your question is fucking useless. But without further ado, here's his defense of himself.
Israel's not going to have support from this country in 20 years. The U.S. is going to say, we've got two factions. Young people on the right who are following in the footsteps of MAGA populist movement, who don't want to fund foreign wars, they vote no on Israel. The far left that hates Israel, they vote no on Israel. Israel, you got no funding anymore. That's what I see happening.
I think that's fairly obvious when you talk to any Zoomers. They're clearly not pro-Israel. They look at the United States and say, look, we have our own problems here. And they look at our history of, foreign adventurism, and they're like, this hasn't worked out for me personally. I can't afford this. I can't pay bills, or I can't have a nice place, or whatever. So I think it's fairly obvious, right?
I think it comes from a lack of education on how foreign policy actually works, and the fact that you literally cannot survive in this world without allies. 10 guys show up to beat you up. Are you going to fight them all by yourself? No, you need friends.
Phil might.
What's that?
What?
I said Phil might.
Phil might. Yeah. But you see this from people in Congress too, that they just don't understand how foreign policy works. I think is really unfortunate. But the other issue to what you're talking about with the lack of Gen Z support for Israel is there are no pro-Israel champions that I really see. I talk about Israel a lot. I'm a raging Zionist. But I don't see a whole lot of other people who have a firm understanding of the history and the context.
Most people can't make a cogent argument that that young people find compelling as to why we should.
Which is why on the right, it's sure, Israel can do its thing, don't care. And on the left, it's down with Israel.
It is utterly astonishing to me that they're casually able to avoid the elephant in the room and talk around the ongoing genocide as they speculate about why Israel might be losing support. Newsflash, it's not because Zoomers don't think that there's a net benefit to materially supporting Israel. It's because they see videos of children dying. It's because they see videos of brains falling out of the scalps of children online, and that has basically led to the outrage. It's not because, I'm doing a cost-benefit analysis and I don't necessarily think that the return on our investment in Israel is good. No, it's because they're seeing people dying and they're having a human reaction. And it's ironic that the self-proclaimed raging Zionist on the panel, Cam Higbee, chalked it up to a lack of education. Actually, it's the opposite. It's pretty clear that they don't support Israel because they're educated. And his goal is to keep it that way by lying to defend Israel, because he tweeted, Israel never targets civilians. Is that so? Israel never targets civilians. Listen, Tim Pool made the choice to platform this person, who is engaging in genocide denial on his podcast with no pushback whatsoever, by the way. First of all, Israel is starving Palestinians to death with their blockade of aid to Gaza. On top of that, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society is calling for an independent international investigation into what they claim were targeted killings of first responders. Hundreds of thousands have been killed in Gaza, many of them directly targeted by the IDF. The IDF double-tapped an aid convoy, for fuck's sake. More women and children have been killed in a single year in Gaza than any recent military conflict. On top of that, human rights groups like Amnesty International have concluded that Israel is indeed doing a genocide. The International Court of Justice ordered Israel to take steps to prevent a plausible genocide, an order that Israel has defied, by the way. And again, the ICC issued an arrest warrant for both Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. But the guy who says that Israel never targets civilians has the audacity to accuse everyone else of not supporting Israel because they're uneducated. Quite the contrary, asshole. We oppose Israel because we're educated. We oppose U.S. foreign policy and aid to Israel because they are complicit with Israel's genocide. But during this podcast, they speculated about why Israel doesn't have much support in the podcast sphere. And Tim Pool claimed that there weren't many defenders of Israel in the space, and that's one of the reasons. And he asked his co-host to name people, big content creators who support Israel, and then immediately they had a bunch of examples like Ben Shapiro and Destiny. But, they seemingly all agree that Israel is losing support because nobody's really making a compelling case to young people as to why our government continues to support Israel. So Cam Higbee is going to try to explain why our government should continue to fund Israel's genocide, and I'm going to let you decide whether or not you think he's persuasive.
The argument for funding Israel is that almost all of the money we give Israel goes into their military. So first of all, from a capitalist perspective, the best part of that is you're taking public dollars and reinjecting them into the private sector. We don't give any money to Israel. We give money to our defense companies. They give weapons to Israel. So the primary benefit of that is, like, a really good example is in 1981, Israel battle-tested F-15s for the first time ever. These F-15s had never been battle-tested. They flew them in combat against Iraq. We learned our F-15s were capable of long-range bombing campaigns against Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor. They didn't lose a single F-15 in battle against Russian MiGs at the height of the Cold War. That was great. They were the first to battle test our F-35 Lightning IIs.
Sure, but that's 40 years ago. So what's today?
F-35 Lightning IIs are today. Trophy systems and Abrams tanks. They were the first to test them. They were one of the first to test JDAMs. So today they're still providing us with, like, the money we give them. We are essentially just an R&D program for our military.
Oh, well, shit. Why didn't you just say that from the start? If you told me that the money that we're giving to Israel is basically research and development for the military, then I would have been on board from the jump. These people are such clowns. Holy shit. Listen, I don't give a flying fuck about the military. You can cut that bitch by 75% and we'd still have one of the largest militaries in the world. And side note, Trump is doing the opposite. He's proposing an unprecedented $1 trillion defense budget. While people starve and they do austerity and cut social safety net programs, we have much more money for bombs, apparently. Doge isn't going to do anything about that. No auditing the Pentagon or the defense budget. Just, we have money for bombs, death and destruction, but no money to feed the poor. It's disgusting. And I'm sure that all of these anti-war independent thinkers on this podcast are going to condemn that, right? What do you even say? It's a joke. This is your independent media, folks. Not so independent, is it? But what is hilarious to me is that after rightfully getting pushback for chumming it up with a war criminal, Tim Pool posted this to Twitter to denounce people with Israel derangement syndrome, as if outrage over a literal genocide is a fucking meme to him. It's just so gross. This is a new low even for Tim Pool. You are a disgrace, Tim. Your father didn't raise you to be this way. I know, because he watches my show and not yours. Your sister is also a really good person. I've talked to her. She's incredibly kind and empathetic. So what happened to you? Were you dropped on your head as a child to where you just lost empathy? I get that it's shamelessness and greed, but I mean, your entire family is ashamed of your shamelessness. How do you not feel any bit of guilt for the propaganda that you're doing? I mean, for a second, just try to not be a propagandist or try to not toe the line and do state propaganda for Trump and just try to be a fucking human being and understand that this is the kind of shit that you are doing propaganda for, Tim Pool. Brett Wilkins of Common Dreams reports an Israeli human rights group on Monday published a report in which Israel Defense Forces officers and soldiers who took part in the creation of a buffer zone along Gaza's border with Israel described alleged war crimes, including indiscriminate killing, as well as the wholesale deliberate destruction of civilian infrastructure in what multiple whistleblowers called a kill zone. Quote, the IDF really is fulfilling the public's wishes, which state there are no innocents in Gaza. We'll show them, one reserve warrant officer explained. People were incriminated for having bags in their hands. Guys show up with the bag, incriminated, terrorist. I believe they came to pick up Hubaiza, but boom, tank shells were fired at him from a half-mile away. In a separate interview with The Guardian, that same officer said that at first, his attitude toward invading Gaza was, I went there because they killed us and now we're going to kill them. And I found out that we're not only killing them, we're killing their wives, their children, their cats, their dogs, they added. We're destroying their houses and pissing on their graves. Another IDF reservist officer told BTS that he was briefed that there is no civilian population in the area where Palestinians are terrorists, all of them. Asked what the area looked like after the IDF clearing operation, the officer replied, Hiroshima. Imagine doing a de facto defense for this behavior. Imagine looking the other way just so you can maintain access to the administration that's complicit with these crimes against humanity. It's despicable. And look, the same goes for liberals too. A lot of them didn't say shit when Biden was complicit with this. And don't think we're going to forget about that. You're all pathetic to me. I mean, if you can ignore this or look the other way or try to rationalize it or justify it and chalk up diminishing support for the country doing this to bots, you're not just a bad journalist or a shitty commentator. You're a terrible fucking person. And you deserve to live with this shame for the rest of your lives. So in conclusion, independent media, like mainstream media, has mostly failed us. The same incentives that plagued mainstream media, such as access journalism and corporate sponsorships, have destroyed independent media thoroughly. So cherish the few independent outlets who are actually independent, like Secular Talk, Majority Report, Rational National, and others like myself, because we're the exception, not the norm, unfortunately.